This video is going to be about the electron transport chain. So we know from the video on the citric acid cycle that we've been storing up a lot of energy in the form of NADH and FADH2. So we're also producing NADH during glycolysis, which happens in the cytoplasm, but the majority of NADH is produced during the citric acid cycle, which is taking place in the mitochondrial matrix. So now we're going to transport the NADH and the FADH2 to the electron transport chain on the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So the electron transport chain is made up of 4 electron carriers and 1 ATP producing protein. So this is going to be complex 1, complex 2, complex 3, complex 4, and then the ATP producing protein is called ATP synthase. So what's going to happen is our NADH and our FADH2 are actually going to go to different proteins. So our NADH is going to drop off its electrons at complex 1. So when it does that, complex 1 is going to pump protons into the inner membrane space. So FADH2, on the other hand, is going to drop its electrons off at complex 2. So complex 2 is unique in that it's the only complex that doesn't pump any protons, which we're going to come back and see later that FADH2 contributes less to the overall ATP formation because it misses this first proton pump. So then from here, now we have electrons in complex 1 and complex 2. So electrons from both of these complexes are going to go to this protein called Q. And so all Q does is act as an electron shuttle. So it's going to shuttle these electrons from the FADH2 and the NADH to complex 3. So they'll go to right here. And then similarly as to complex 1, complex 3 is also going to pump protons into the inner membrane space. So from there, the electrons will go to another protein that's called cytochrome C. So cytochrome C is again just another shuttle for these electrons. So finally they'll get dropped off at complex 4, which is also going to pump protons into the inner membrane space. And when they get to complex 4, they'll combine with hydrogen and oxygen to make H2O. And so that's where the H2O production comes from. The electron transport chain is in complex 4. So now that we've transported our electrons all the way down to our final electron acceptor, which in aerobic respiration is oxygen to produce water, now we can start looking at how we make this ATP. So throughout this whole process, we've been pumping a lot of protons into the inner membrane space. And it's important to remember that we don't have just one electron transport chain in our mitochondria, because we have that huge surface area on the inner mitochondrial membrane, so we have multiple different copies of this chain. So as you can imagine, we're going to get a really high concentration of protons inside of our inner membrane space. So now we need somewhere for those protons to go. So what's going to happen is those protons are going to start flowing through ATP synthase back into the mitochondrial matrix. And so as it does that, we're going to start producing ATP. And so what will happen is ADP will combine with a phosphate to make ATP. And when you produce ATP like this, it's called oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, I don't think you can see that, but it's oxidative phosphorylation. And so something that's really important in this is the idea of chemiosmosis. So during this whole process, we've been pumping these protons into the inner membrane space, and then as they flow back down, they're going to flow back down through chemiosmosis. So that's how these protons are moving from one side of the membrane to the other through this ATP synthase. And then through that, this is really where the huge majority of the ATP is produced in cellular respiration. So without this electron transport chain, or if you're missing one of these proteins, or if there's a defect in one of the proteins, it's going to be a serious problem for your cell because you're not going to be able to produce as much ATP. So just to review one last time, NADH and FADH2 are going to drop off their electrons in different places complex 1 for NADH, complex 2 for FADH2. They'll both send their electrons to Q, which will shuttle them to 3, and both 1 and 3 are going to pump protons as they transport these electrons. From 3, they're going to go to cytochrome C, and then finally to complex 4, which will also pump protons, but complex 4 will then pass those electrons on down to oxygen, which is our final electron acceptor in aerobic respiration to form a molecule of water. So then those protons that we have out in the intermembrane space will flow back down their chemical gradient through chemiosmosis through ATP synthase to produce ATP by oxidative phosphorylation. I hope you found this video really helpful. The concepts and information presented in these videos will be true regardless of what biology course you're taking. However, the material we covered in this video is specifically referencing material covered in Campbell Biology's 11th edition. Remember that if you are an enrolled Baylor student, we do offer free tutoring on the first floor of the Sid Richardson building, and you can schedule a free 30-minute appointment to have one-on-one tutoring online, or you can stop by during any of our business hours. For more information about the services we provide, you can go to our website at www.baylor.edu/tutoring. Thank you.